Hello and welcome to the first lesson in the environmental aspect of your medicine course. So the medicine course is split into two. We have the thematic section, which is what we've previously been working through, looking at how medicine's changed right from the medieval period up to the modern day. And then there's this section called the environmental study. So we're looking at what medicine was like in a specific environment. And our given environment is the World War I trenches. Now, this accounts for about a third of your overall medicine paper. So, all of the questions on the environment section will only be worth 16 marks. On the thematic section, they're worth 36 marks. So, it's roughly a third. Now, today we're going to be looking at the context, really, setting up the big picture. So, what was life like on the Western Front? Now, when you think of World War I, you may not immediately think about medicine. It seems a bit of a leap. But actually, war has throughout history been really important in pushing medicine forward. And World War I led to lots of very important developments within medicine. For example, this is the first time that we get blood transfusions. This is the first time we get new forms of plastic surgery. The trauma and the injuries of the war. When you think of World War I, medical advancements may not be the first thing to jump to mind. However, World War I was very important in pushing medicine forward. It was the catalyst for a number of really important developments, like blood transfusions or surgical developments and plastic surgery. The horrors created by the war, the brutal nature of the injuries suffered by the soldiers, forced doctors to innovate and experiment to find new and better treatments. I'd like you now to watch this clip as a way of further setting the scene. So today we're actually kind of going to leave the medicine aspect to the side, and we're going to be focusing on the trench system and what life was like on the Western Front. Now hopefully you remember a bit of the trench system from Year 9, but I'm going to give you a quick recap to remind you of some of the key details. So in the summer of 1914, Germany invaded France through Belgium. This caused the British, here in an alliance with Belgium, to declare war on Germany on the 4th of August. The British then sent their army, known as the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, over to Europe to try and stop the German advance through Belgium. Working with the French, the British were successful at stopping the German advance, and the two sides fell into trench warfare along the French-Belgian border. So they weren't really moving their troops. It was now more a war of attrition. The war was now a static war based on trenches, which needed to be defended from the enemy, with attempts made to advance from the trenches to seize land from the enemy army. A line of trenches was eventually established all the way from the English Channel in the north to Switzerland in the south. Initially in 1914, the trenches were quite simple, but they became much more complex as the war went on. And here we got an image that shows you how it's not just a single line of trenches, but in fact the trenches were a complex system with many different kinds of trenches there. So at the front, at that 15%, we've got the firing line. Just in front of that is no man's land. So no man's land is the land between the two lines of trenches, between the British trench and the German trenches. This was unclaimed land. This is what they were fighting over. Now, no man's land would have been protected by a line of barbed wire, as we can see in the image. And then there would have been that first line of trenches, the firing line. This would have been the front. However, there were a lot of trenches behind that, as we can see there. There were support trenches, reserve trenches, communication trenches, because men and supplies needed to be brought through to that front trench at times of attack. So here we've got a cross section of a trench. And now trenches were dug down into the ground, and they're fighting in France and Belgium. So there would have been lots of mud, lots of issues in terms of like creating something that's quite stable and safe for the men. So we've got things like duck boards to raise them above the mud that would have been at the bottom there. We've got fire steps allowing them to see over the top of the trench when needed, ammo shells, barbed wire protection. We've got a second version of a cross section here as well. Now, it's important we know a little bit about some of the key battles of World War I. When we look at medical sources, it'll be important to contextualise them and know what was happening when they were made. So, let's have a look at a few of the key battles. Firstly, we have the Battle of Ypres. Now, Ypres was known as Wipers to uneducated English Tommies who were struggling with the Flemish name, is a town in western Belgium. Now, throughout the war, it would be the scene of numerous battles and would eventually be utterly destroyed, but rebuilt following World War I. Now, in the first months of World War I, Ypres was controlled by the British. In the autumn of 1914, the Germans launched an attack on the British positions to the east and north of Ypres. Although the British lost over 50,000 troops in the battle, which went on from October to November, they did hold on to Ypres. And this was really important because it meant they controlled the English Channel ports so that supplies and reinforcements could be provided. However, the town was now stuck in a bulge, what's known as a salient, because the Germans had managed to push forward and now control the land around the town. So this made the British line bulge at Ypres. So you'll hear people talk about the Ypres salient, and they mean this bulge in the British lines around the town. So that was our first battle. Let's move on to our second. The second Battle of Ypres. Now, to the southeast of Ypres, there was a man-made hill that had been captured by the Germans in December 1914, and it gave them a great strategic advantage because of the height of the hill. Now, this hill was known as Hill 60. Now, the British knew they needed to get the Germans off Hill 60, and for this they used an age-old tactic in war, tunnelling. So the British recruited lots of miners from places like Northumberland and Manchester, people who'd previously worked in coal mines or those who had dug sewers in London. And they put them to work tunnelling underneath the hill. 5 mines were placed in those tunnels, and they were exploded, and they blew the top off Hill 60. So the British were able to take this really important strategic position just outside of Ypres. Now, as soon as the battle for Hill 60 was finished, the second Battle of Ypres began. This took place as a sequence of battles over a period of about a month, from April to May 1915. Now, it's significant as it's the first time the Germans used chlorine gas on the Western Front. British losses totalled about 59,000 men. By the end of the battle, the Germans had moved about 2 miles closer to the town of Ypres on the eastern side of the salient. Now we're going to move away from Ypres and look at the first Battle of Arras in 1917. Now, Arras was an area of chalk, and so it was very easy to tunnel through. So the British brought in their tunnelling companies, and these men dug more than 2.5 miles of tunnels in 5 months. And these were incredibly sophisticated set of tunnels which were electric, so they had electric lights in them, they had running water, there was a light railway system, there was even a fully functioning hospital. By April 1917, 24,000 men were hidden in those tunnels near the German trenches, and they were ordered to attack. The aim of the offensive was to break through the German lines, and it initially seemed to go well. It seemed like they had met their objective because they advanced about 8 miles. However, the advance slowed and really virtually no progress was made. By the end of the offensive, there were a huge number of casualties, 160,000 British and Canadians. Now we're going to move back to Ypres. So the Third Battle of Ypres took place in 1917, and its objective was for the British Army to break out of that bulge, that Ypres salient. Now the area around Ypres was called Passchendaele, and you may well have heard of Passchendaele because it's where some of the very famous fighting took place and where some of the great war poets like Wilfred Owen lost their lives. Now, the British campaign wasn't really successful. It lasted from June through to November, and by then the British moved the edge of the salient back by about 7 miles, but the cost of this advance was estimated to be 245,000 British casualties. The final battle we're going to look at is the Battle of Cambrai. Now, Cambrai shows that the generals were learning from their experiences previously. It was launched on the 20th of October 1917. It was the first time tanks were used on a really large scale. Nearly 500 of them were used in this battle. They'd been around since 1916 and the Battle of the Somme. Now, I said earlier that it showed that the generals were learning, and it does. Previously, artillery barrages, that means the firing of lots of heavy guns on the enemy troops, had warned the Germans that an attack was coming. So at Cambrai, the barrage was changed, so less warning was given to the Germans. Well, now you've heard my explanations of the key battles, please could you create a timeline using information and make sure that each battle has name, dates, and 2 important points about the battle. Remember, we like some nugget knowledge, so any statistics you can put in would be fab. Now, I've already given you some detail on the battles and on the environment itself, so watch this clip to learn a little bit more about how soldiers were prepared and what they were wearing.